The judge had just sentenced me to 15 years in federal prison for stealing $4.8 million from a children's charity and conspiring in the death of my best friend, whose cabin was set on fire. My wife smiled. My son looked relieved. They were certain this 65-year-old blind man had finally lost everything. As the officers reached for my arms, my 10-year-old granddaughter stepped into the aisle, clutching an old wooden music box. "Your Honor," she said, "may I show you what Grandpa hid inside?" My wife's smile vanished. My son's face turned white. "If you found your way here, I am glad you did. Welcome to Dad's cold revenge. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? Every name matters to me. Some details here are fictional, crafted to carry a message worth hearing. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but what this story teaches you is anything but." The gavel came down hard. I felt it before I heard it, the vibration traveling up through the wooden bench beneath me, through my spine, all the way to the base of my skull. 41 years of reading courtrooms had taught me that a gavel never lies. It does not soften its meaning. It does not choose kind words. It simply falls, and whatever it says, it means completely. This one said 15 years. The defendant, Edward James Calloway. Judge Carol Whitman said, her voice carrying the flat precision of a woman who had delivered sentences for 23 years and had long since stopped letting her face do anything her words hadn't already done. Having been found guilty on all counts, wire fraud, embezzlement of funds from a federally registered nonprofit organization, and conspiracy in the death of Arthur James Sinclair, is hereby sentenced to 15 years in a federal correctional facility. I stood straight. My back ached the way it always did in the mornings, now a deep, grinding ache that started below my left shoulder blade and spread outward like cracks in old concrete. But I stood straight. My father had been a steel worker from Pittsburgh who bent his back to no man, and whatever else I had lost in the past 6 months, I had not lost that. My dark glasses sat heavy on my face. Behind them, the world was not dark. It had not been dark for months. But no one in this courtroom knew that not Judge Whitman, not Dennis Kraft at the prosecution table, not the 12 jurors who had spent 3 weeks listening to a story about a greedy old man. Not even Claire Donovan sitting beside me with her pen pressed so hard against her legal pad that I could hear the wood of the table straining beneath her fingers. I heard Maggie shift in her seat at the plaintiff's table. 20 years of marriage had given me a precise catalog of her sounds. The whisper of silk when she was settling in the particular rhythm of her breath, when she was pleased with how an evening was going. That sound, the one she made now, was the sound of a woman who had attended enough charity galas to know exactly how to hold herself in the moment of a victory she had spent 2 years engineering. Her chair barely moved. Her breathing barely changed. But I heard the satisfaction in it, small and certain as a key turning in a lock. Beside her, Nathan made a different sound. His chair scraped not the composed shift of someone adjusting their posture, but the jagged, involuntary movement of a man whose body was reacting to something his mind was still pretending wasn't happening. I had known that sound too for 38 years. It was the sound of my son trying to hold himself together in a room where falling apart would cost him something. 2 court officers stepped toward the defense table. I turned my head slightly toward Claire. She had both palms flat on the table, and the knuckle of her right thumb had gone white where she was pressing it against the wood. She was 34 years old, and she had fought this case for 4 months with the particular ferocity of someone who had made a promise to a man who was no longer alive to see it kept. I could feel the grief on her like a physical thing, and beneath it, the controlled fury of someone who knows the math is wrong and cannot yet show where. The officers were 3 feet away. Then from the back of the courtroom came a voice, small, clear, completely unafraid. "Your Honor, may I open my grandfather's music box?" The room went still in the way rooms only go still when something has happened that no one planned for. I did not turn around. I did not need to. I knew that voice the way I knew the sound of "You Are My Sunshine" at 6 o'clock in the morning, the way I knew the weight of a 10-year-old girl climbing into my lap without asking permission. My throat tightened until breathing required active effort, and I pressed the feeling down into my chest and held it there. The court officers stopped. At the plaintiff's table, Maggie turned. I heard it, the sharp, controlled movement of a woman whose composure had just encountered something it had not accounted for. The whisper of her dress as she twisted. Then nothing. A held breath. The particular quality of silence that belongs to a person who has just looked at something and understood in the space of half a second that they have made a catastrophic miscalculation. Nathan's chair scraped back so fast it struck the bar behind him. Lily walked down the center aisle of courtroom 4 wearing her good blue dress, the one with the white collar she saved for school concerts and holidays. Her hair was brushed. Her shoes were the good ones. She held the music box against her chest with both arms, the small wooden box I had spent 3 months making for her 6th birthday, its corners worn and its paint chipped at the edges because she had carried it everywhere for 4 years. The carved bird on the lid caught the courtroom light as she walked, and the brass keyhole winked once. She did not look at Maggie. She did not look at Nathan. Her eyes found me across the length of that courtroom with the unerring precision of a compass finding north. And when they did, her chin began to tremble just slightly, the way it did when she was working very hard to be brave about something enormous. I nodded at her once. She pressed her lips together, squared her small shoulders, and kept walking. Behind me, I heard Rosa Medina make a sound in the 3rd row, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath that she tried to press down into something quieter and could not manage. Rosa had worked in my house for 11 years. She had carried things in silence that would have broken people half her age. That sound, the one she was making now, was not grief. It was recognition. It was the sound of a woman watching something she had prayed for arrive. Kraft was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Mr. Kraft." Judge Whitman's voice cut across the room. She was looking at Lily, at the box, at me. Her expression was the expression of a woman who had spent 23 years believing she had seen every possible variation of what a courtroom could produce, and was revising that belief in real time. "I will handle this." Claire's hand found my arm. She pressed once, firm, steady, and leaned close enough that only I could catch what she said, beneath the rising noise of the gallery, beneath Kraft's continued objections, and the rustle of reporters reaching for their notebooks. "Ed." Her voice was barely a breath. "Is that—" "Yes," I said. I kept my voice low enough that it carried only to her, and I felt her go absolutely still beside me the way she had gone still 4 months ago in that visiting room when I first told her what I had done. That same quality of held breath. That same charged stillness of a woman rapidly rebuilding everything she understood about the situation in front of her. Bear the box." "Everything you need," I said, "is inside the music box." For 1 full second, Claire did not move. Then she was on her feet. "Your Honor." Her voice came out clear and strong and cutting through the murmur of the gallery with the precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment and intended to use it completely. "The defense moves to stay the execution of this sentence pending the submission of newly discovered material evidence directly relevant to the verdict in this case." The gallery erupted. Through the noise, through Kraft's rapid objections, and the judge's sharp commands for order, through the sound of people rising from their seats, and the bailiff moving toward the bar, I heard one sound more clearly than all the others. Maggie's breath. Not the breath of a woman who was angry. Not the breath of a woman outraged at a procedural complication. The breath of a woman who, for the very first time in 6 months, was afraid. 6 months before that gavel fell, I was a retired man with a glass of bourbon and a study full of afternoon light. I had signed my retirement papers that morning. 37 years of balance sheets, audit trails, and quarterly reports reduced to a single signature on a document that felt lighter than it should have. I poured myself 2 fingers of Pappy Van Winkle I had been saving for exactly this occasion, and told myself I was supposed to feel something. Relief, maybe. Pride. The particular piece of a man who had done his work honestly and was finally done. What I felt instead was Arthur Sinclair walking through my front door without calling ahead. He was 68 years old and walked with a mahogany cane his late wife had given him for his 60th birthday, a beautiful thing hand-carved with a silver handle he kept polished. He moved with it the way dignified men carry their age without apology. He dropped into the leather chair across from my desk with a grunt. He would have been embarrassed to know I heard, then looked at me with the eyes of a man who had spent 50 years reading contracts for hidden meanings. "I need you to look at something," he said, and placed a folder on my desk. I opened it. In 6 months, $4.8 million had moved out of Bright Harbor Foundation, the nonprofit I had built after my first wife, Margaret, died. The one that paid for chemotherapy and surgical procedures for children whose families couldn't cover the cost. The money had passed through 3 consulting companies registered in Delaware, all sharing the same post office box address, before disappearing into a bank account in Panama. My digital signature appeared on every transfer authorization. "I didn't sign these," I said. "I know." Arthur's voice was careful. "Patricia Lund flagged the discrepancies 8 weeks ago. She came to me because she didn't know who else she could trust." Patricia Lund had run Bright Harbor's day-to-day operations for 11 years. She was the kind of woman who noticed when a single line item was $4 off and stayed late to find out why. If she had flagged this, she had been certain. "Who has access to my systems?" I asked. Arthur looked at me steadily. "Maggie manages your correspondence. Nathan set up the biometric authentication on your laptop 2 years ago." I closed the folder. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. 37 years of forensic accounting had trained me to treat a suspicious number the way a surgeon treats an open wound, with precision, not panic. I set the folder down and turned my bourbon glass slowly in my hands and thought about the architecture of what I had just been shown. Then Lily exploded through the study door. She was 10 years old, all energy and gap-toothed grin, and she hit my chest hard enough to slosh bourbon over my fingers. She grabbed the glass, held it up to the light the way she always did, and demanded to know if today was a special day. "The first day of the rest of my life," I told her, according to certain motivational posters. She considered this with the gravity it deserved. "That sounds made up," she said, and Arthur laughed the big rolling laugh that had not changed 1 degree in 31 years, and Lily beamed and launched herself back out the door, calling for Rosa about dinner. The warmth she left behind lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then I became aware of Maggie in the doorway. She was dressed for an evening out, a glass of white wine in her hand, watching the space where Lily had just been. The smile on her face was the smile I had seen at 100 charity galas, warm, practiced, precisely calibrated. She greeted Arthur with genuine-sounding warmth, said she would let Rosa know he was staying for dinner, and walked back down the hallway. Arthur waited until her footsteps faded completely. "Ed," he said quietly. How long was she standing outside that door? My hands, which had been steady all afternoon, were not quite steady anymore. I don't know, I said. I honestly don't know. 3 days later, I was driving home on Route 15 when the brake pedal went to the floor. The last thing I remember clearly is the radio. An old Springsteen album one Margaret had loved playing through the speakers of my car as I came down the long slope on Route 15. The evening air smelled like cut grass and coming rain. I was thinking about nothing in particular, which was a luxury I was still learning to afford in retirement, when I pressed the brake pedal and felt it sink all the way to the floor without resistance. There is no adequate way to describe that sensation to someone who has never experienced it. It is not panic. Panic implies a moment of decision. What I felt was simpler and more absolute than that, the sudden, complete understanding that the next several seconds were entirely outside my control. The car went through the guardrail. It rolled twice. When it stopped, rain had begun on the windshield, and I could not move my left arm, and the world had gone the particular gray of a television with no signal. Then nothing for a while. I woke in Greenwich Hospital with 3 cracked ribs, a laceration above my left eye that had required 11 stitches, and what the attending physician described as significant trauma to both optic nerves from the impact. She used words like temporary and recovery timeline and reasons for optimism, and I listened to all of them and understood that what she was telling me carefully was that I could not see. Detective Frank Kowalski had been doing this job for 26 years, and in 26 years, he had developed exactly one habit that his supervisors consistently failed to break him of. He went to accident scenes before the official team arrived. Not to interfere, just to look. He had learned 2 decades ago that the first 15 minutes at a scene tell you things that no photograph or report ever quite captures. He knelt beside my car on Route 15 and looked at the brake line with a flashlight for a long time. The cut was clean. Not frayed, not corroded, not the gradual deterioration of a component that had been neglected. Clean. The kind of clean that required a tool and a decision. Kowalski took out his notebook, a small, spiral-bound thing he had carried in his left breast pocket for 11 years, and wrote 3 sentences. Then he took photographs with his personal phone. Then he stood up and waited for the official team to arrive. His supervisor called him that evening. The case was straightforward, he was told. Mechanical failure. Write the report accordingly. Kowalski wrote the report accordingly, but he kept the notebook. Under Connecticut's Whistleblower Protection Act, an officer who preserved evidence of potential wrongdoing without destroying it retained certain legal protections if that evidence later became relevant. He told himself that was why he kept it. He had not yet decided whether that was true. Lou Barnett had lived across the street from me for 20 years. She was 63 years old, a retired postal worker, with a habit of walking her terrier at 10 o'clock every evening, regardless of weather. She told Kowalski when he knocked on her door the following morning that she had seen a dark-colored sedan parked in front of my house the previous evening. It had been there for approximately 40 minutes. The engine was running the entire time. When she came back from her walk, it was gone. She had not thought much of it at the time. She thought of it now. Maggie was sitting beside my hospital bed when I woke. She was holding my hand with both of hers, and her eyes were red at the rims, and she said, "I thought I was going to lose you," in a voice that broke in exactly the right place. Across the room, Nathan stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed over his chest, staring at the floor with an intensity that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the particular interior mathematics of a man waiting to find out what a situation was going to cost him. I could not see either of them clearly. The world behind my dark glasses was a shifting blur of light and shape colors bleeding into one another. But I could hear everything. I heard Maggie's breathing controlled, measured with that small, satisfied undertone I had learned to recognize at charity dinners when an evening was going exactly the way she had planned. I heard Nathan's foot shift against the linoleum, a restless, trapped sound. And when the nurse came in that evening with a small brown bottle and said that my wife had arranged for a specialist to provide a prescription eye drop regimen to support nerve recovery, I heard something in Maggie's voice as she took the bottle and said she would administer the drops herself. "I want to make sure," she said, smoothing the blanket over my legs with careful, tender hands, "that you never miss a dose." It was the word never that stayed with me, not the warmth in her voice, not the gentleness of her hands. The word never and the quiet satisfaction underneath it, faint as a wrong note in an otherwise perfect piece of music. The kind of thing you only catch if you have spent 37 years listening for exactly that. Darkness has its own geography. I learned that in the first week after I came home from Greenwich Hospital. There was the darkness behind closed eyes, and the darkness of an unlit room, and the darkness of a world where light existed, but your eyes could no longer translate it into meaning. I lived in the third kind now. Shapes without edges, colors bleeding into one another like watercolor left in rain. Dr. Gordon Hale came to the house on a Tuesday. Maggie had arranged it. He was an ophthalmologist connected to the hospital board. She sat on a trim man in his early 50s with the unhurried manner of someone accustomed to delivering assessments that other people found distressing. He examined my eyes with practiced efficiency, spoke about optic nerve trauma and inflammation pathways, and prescribed a regimen of medicated eye drops 4 times daily, he said, to reduce swelling and support nerve recovery. "How long?" I asked. "Weeks," he said. "Possibly months. The important thing is consistency." Maggie walked him to the door. I heard them speaking in low voices in the hallway, and I heard Hale say something that ended with the phrase "significant cognitive effect," and I told myself he was talking about the accident. The first week my eyes burned after every drop. My heart beat too fast. My mouth went dry. I told myself these were side effects. Normal. Expected. The second week I started forgetting things. Not large things at first, small ones. I asked Rosa one morning whether she had made coffee, and she told me gently that we had drunk it together 20 minutes ago, that I had told her a story about a client from 1987, that I had laughed at my own punchline. I had no memory of any of it. One night I woke at 2 in the morning and did not know what room I was in. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I had to press both palms flat against the mattress and count backward from 20 before the panic subsided. Maggie sat on the edge of my bed that same evening and took my hand. Dr. Hale thinks the accident may have affected your cognitive function," she said, her voice warm with concern. "You shouldn't be worrying about finances or the foundation right now. Nathan and I are handling everything. All you need to do is rest and let the drops do their work." She squeezed my hand, once stood up and left the room. I lay in the dark and felt something I had not felt in 37 years of professional life. The cold, creeping sensation of being outmaneuvered and not yet being able to see clearly enough to understand exactly how. Then one morning Lily came. She slipped through the bedroom door while Maggie was downstairs, climbed up onto the bed beside me with the casual confidence of a child who has never needed permission, and pressed her face close to mine. "Grandpa," she whispered, "why does Grandma Maggie give you drops more times than Dr. Hale said?" My chest went tight. "What do you mean, sweetheart? The bottle says 4 times. Her voice was careful, precise, the voice of a child who had read the label and counted. "But last night she gave them to you twice after you were already asleep. I saw her through the door." She hesitated, then. "After she left, I heard her tell Dad, that soon you wouldn't be able to remember things well enough to argue with anyone. The tightness in my chest spread outward until my whole body felt it. In 37 years of forensic accounting, I had learned to trust one thing above all others: not documents, not testimony, not the confident assertions of men in expensive suits. I trusted the moment when the numbers stopped adding up. That cold, specific feeling in the stomach that said something here is not what it claims to be. I was feeling it now. "Thank you," I told Lily, and kept my voice steady for her sake. "You did the right thing telling me." She nodded against my shoulder, pressed her small hand over mine, and held on. "I have built a career on one principle: the first move is never the obvious one." The obvious move was to confront Maggie, tell her what Lily had seen, demand an explanation. That is what a frightened man would do, and a frightened man would lose everything within 48 hours, because Maggie had been preparing for this moment far longer than I had. So I did not make the obvious move. I waited until Rosa came in with my morning coffee, and I asked her quietly to do something for me. "Ein Walgreens," I said. "Norwalk, not Greenwich. Saline I drops the plain kind, no medication. Pay cash. Don't mention it to anyone in this house." Rosa set the coffee mug down on my nightstand, with both hands wrapped around it. She looked at me for a long moment. This woman who had worked in my house for 11 years, who had made enchiladas from scratch every Friday, and never once taken a sick day, and something moved across her face that was not quite grief and not quite anger, but carried elements of both. "Okay, Mr. Calloway," she said. That was all. She picked up her tray and walked out, and I heard her footsteps go down the stairs without hesitation. She came back that afternoon with a small bottle in her apron pocket. That evening, when Maggie brought the prescription drops, I knocked over my water glass. It was a convincing accident. I had always had steady hands, and their absence was easy to perform. While Maggie bent to clean the water from the nightstand, I palmed the real bottle and slid Rosa's saline into its place. From that night forward, every time Maggie administered my drops, I let the saline run down my cheek and pressed my face into a grimace of discomfort. She wiped my face with a cool cloth and murmured reassurances, and I lay still and breathed evenly and thought about Panama. 5 days later, my mind came back, not gradually. Suddenly, like a window being thrown open in a room that had been sealed all winter. I woke on a Thursday morning and remembered clearly and completely every conversation I had held in the past week. The fog that had been settling over my thoughts for 2 weeks lifted between one breath and the next, and what replaced it was cold and sharp and very, very focused. 2 weeks after that, the edges of the window frame appeared. Not clearly, not in detail, but they're a dark rectangle against the pale blur of the wall, solid and specific, in a world that had been nothing but gradient and suggestion. I lay still and did not move, and did not make a sound, because Maggie was in the hallway outside my door, and the most important thing I now possessed was the fact that she did not know. I kept the dark glasses on. I kept the hesitation in my movements, the slight tilt of my head that said I was orienting by sound rather than sight. I asked Maggie where she was standing when I could see her perfectly. I thanked Rosa for guiding my hand to the coffee cup she had placed directly in front of me, and I watched. On the 12th night, I saw Nathan come into my study at 11:47. Through the gap beneath my bedroom door, through the dark glasses I had not removed, I watched him cross the room to my desk. His hands were shaking. I could see that even from the hallway, the fine tremor running through his fingers as he picked up my phone. He held it carefully, the way you hold something that doesn't belong to you, and pressed my right thumb against the biometric reader. The screen unlocked. Maggie appeared behind him. Her voice when she spoke was the voice she used at foundation board meetings, low, precise, utterly without heat. "The second account," she said. "Do it now." Nathan's jaw worked. His whole body was rigid with the effort of a man doing something he understood was irrevocable and could not find a way to stop. He navigated to the transfer screen with both thumbs and confirmed the transaction. I heard the soft chime of $1.2 million leaving an account I had built over 4 decades. I pressed my back teeth together until my jaw ached. Then I picked up my phone and called Arthur Sinclair. The package arrived on a Wednesday, delivered through Arthur's hands from a man named Gerald Fitch. Gerald had spent 22 years as a special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit before retiring to a consulting firm in Stamford. He and I had worked together on 3 forensic audits in the 90s, and I trusted him with the specific trust you develop for people you have watched perform under pressure. When I called Arthur and told him what I needed, Arthur called Gerald. No emails, no texts. Cash payment through an intermediary. The kind of transaction that leaves no trail because the people involved understand exactly why trails are dangerous. Rosa brought the package to my room without a word and set it on the bed beside me. I waited until I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall. Then I sat up, opened the package by touch, and held the device in my palm. It was smaller than I expected. Gerald had described it to me over the phone. Military-grade motion activated a lens, the diameter of a shirt button, a memory chip rated for 400 hours of footage. The housing was designed to fit inside a standard decorative glass eye or a small aperture fitting. It would record in complete darkness using infrared. The battery would last 6 months. I asked Rosa to bring me the music box. She appeared in the doorway holding it in both hands, the way you carry something that matters to someone you love. The carved bird on the lid caught the afternoon light. The brass keyhole winked. Rosa set it on my lap, and when she looked at me, this woman who had made Friday enchiladas and known when not to ask questions for 11 years, her eyes filled so fast she had to press her lips together hard to keep from making a sound. "Thank you, Rosa," I said. She nodded and left. I sat down on the floor, not in my chair. The floor, because the floor felt more honest, more appropriate to what I was about to do. I kept my dark glasses on, because Maggie was at a foundation event, but could return early, and the single most important advantage I possessed was that no one in this house knew I could see. Then I began. Gerald had walked me through the installation twice over the phone. Remove the brass fitting around the keyhole with a thumbnail. Seat the camera housing into the aperture. Replace the fitting. 14 steps. Straightforward, he had said, for a man with steady hands. My hands were not steady. The camera slipped the first time and skittered across the hardwood. I found it by touch, moving my fingers in slow, expanding circles, the way you search a dark room when you cannot turn on the lights. The second attempt got the housing partially seated before the fitting slipped, and the whole thing came apart. My jaw clenched until my back teeth ached. Sweat made the housing slippery. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs, breathed slowly through my nose, and told myself that a man who had spent 37 years finding things other people hid could figure out how to fit a camera into a music box. Somewhere during the second hour, I heard Rosa in the hallway. Not her footsteps, she had stopped outside my door. I heard the soft sound of her back sliding down the wall, and then I heard her crying. Very quietly. The way women cry when they have decided no one should hear them, pressing the sound down into something small and contained. She did not come in. She did not offer to help. She simply sat outside my door in the hallway and wept for an old man sitting on the floor in the dark, and I have never in my life felt less alone than I did in that moment. The housing clicked into place on the third attempt. I sat very still with the music box in my lap, and my hands wrapped around it, and my heart hammering from effort and something else, something that took me a moment to name. It was purpose. Simple and absolute. Whatever happened next, this small wooden box with its carved bird and its brass keyhole was going to watch over my granddaughter. That was enough. The front door opened at 3:45. Lily's backpack hit the entryway floor. Her voice carried from downstairs, rapid and enthusiastic, telling Rosa something about a pottery project. Then her feet on the stairs, and she was in the doorway stopping when she saw me on the floor. "Grandpa, why are you sitting down there?" "Thinking," I said. She accepted this without question and came to sit beside me. She looked at the music box in my lap, then up at me. "Did you fix something inside it?" "I gave it a special eye," I said. "So it can watch over you when Grandpa can't see." Lily took the box from my hands and held it up, turning it slowly. Then she pressed it firmly against her chest and wrapped both arms around it. "Every evening," I said, "before bed, put it on the shelf in my study. Can you do that for me?" "Every evening," she said with the gravity of someone accepting a serious commission. Then quietly, "Grandpa, I'll protect it." My throat tightened until I could not speak for a moment. That night, through the wall, I heard Maggie's voice in the hallway. 3 words came through clearly. "Arthur is becoming a problem." The music box recorded everything. I understood this only in retrospect, that while I lay in my bedroom each night, with my dark glasses on, and my breathing slow and deliberate, the small eye I had fitted into that brass keyhole was watching the room I could no longer safely enter. Lily kept her promise without fail. Every evening before bed, I heard her footsteps cross the hallway and descend the stairs, heard the soft placement of the box on the study shelf, heard her come back up. She never mentioned it. She simply did it the way children honor the things they have been trusted with. The first footage that mattered came on a Thursday night. 11:47. I was lying in bed listening to the house settle when I heard the study door open. Through the gap beneath my bedroom door, I could see the thin line of light from the hallway, and I watched it shift as 2 figures moved into the room. Nathan. Then Maggie. I heard Nathan's breathing from across the hall, shallow and too fast. The breathing of a man doing something he understood was permanent. I heard the soft tap of my phone being lifted from the desk. Then the long pause of a man gathering himself before a threshold he cannot uncross. "It has to be the thumb," Maggie said. Her voice was the voice she used when she was managing logistics, the same voice she used to coordinate catering for 200 people. Precise, impersonal. "Hold it flat against the reader." "I know how it works." Nathan's voice came out cracked at the edges, rough with something that wanted very much to be anger and kept collapsing into desperation instead. "I set the system up. I know exactly how it works." "Then do it." A pause. Then the soft chime of biometric authentication, a sound I had heard 1,000 times when it meant something ordinary, and which now landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. $1.2 million. Gone. "The second account," Maggie said. "Maggie, Nathan, just his name. The way you say a name when you are done negotiating." A longer pause this time. I pressed both palms flat against the mattress and counted my own heartbeats and did not move. Another chime. I thought about Bright Harbor, about the children whose treatment funds were being emptied by the sound of a notification on a phone, and something cold and precise settled into my chest, alongside the grief the thing that had gotten me through 37 years of forensic work. Not anger. Focus. 3 nights later, Howard Greer came to the house. I heard his car in the driveway. At 9 in the evening, heard Maggie greet him at the front door with the warmth she reserved for useful men, heard the study door close behind them. His voice when he spoke carried the measured cadence of a man who charged $400 an hour and had learned to make that rate feel like a bargain. "The clause is already in the document," Greer said. "Has been for 2 years. If he's convicted of any financial felony, any at all, the trust transfers automatically. No appeal. No reversal. She becomes sole trustee within 72 hours of sentencing." Nathan's voice came from across the room, lower and tighter than before. "He signed this 2 years ago. He signed what your mother placed in front of him on a Sunday afternoon while he was drinking coffee and trusting the people in his kitchen." Greer's tone did not change by a single degree. "That is not a criticism. It is a fact. The document is valid. The clause is enforceable. All that remains is the predicate offense. And the charges against him are already being constructed," Maggie said. "The digital trail is complete. The transfers bear his authentication. The foundation records show his signature on every authorization. By the time the FBI receives the complaint, which they will receive from a concerned former colleague of Arthur's, filed anonymously Monday morning, the case will be self-evident." I lay in the dark and understood with the cold clarity of a man reading a spreadsheet that has already been finalized that this had never been about frightening me. It had never been about leverage or negotiation, or any of the improvised cruelties that desperate people commit. This had been constructed, brick by brick, over 2 years before I had retired, before the accident, before the drops, before I had understood that there was anything to understand. She had not married me. She had acquired me. I reached for my phone and called Arthur. "Come for dinner tomorrow," I said, "and bring everything you have." Arthur called on Thursday morning, and his voice was different, not dramatically different. Arthur Sinclair was not a dramatic man, but I had known that voice for 31 years, known it through faculty mixers and courtroom hallways, and 31 years of bourbon and arguments that ended in laughter, and I heard the difference. The way you hear a crack in a floorboard, you have crossed 10,000 times. Something beneath the familiar surface had shifted. "Ed," he said, "I found it, all of it." I sat up straighter in my bed. "Tell me." 3 shell companies, same registered agent out of Wilmington, Delaware, all incorporated within a 6-week window 14 months ago. His voice was controlled, but moving fast. The voice of a man organizing information he needed me to have quickly. The money from Bright Harbor passed through all 3 before landing in a trust account in Panama. The trust is registered under a holding company with no traceable ownership, but the signatory authorization contains a name. A real one. I have the documentation, Ed, originals. I've already sent copies to Patricia at the foundation, so there's a backup regardless of what happens tonight. Regardless of what happens tonight. I noticed the phrase. Arthur was a precise man. He did not use words carelessly. "Come at 7, I said. "Come straight here." "I'll be there," he said. "Don't tell anyone I'm coming." What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that Maggie had installed a call forwarding application on my phone 3 weeks earlier. Every call I received was simultaneously routed to a second number. She had been listening to my conversations for nearly a month. That evening, the music box recorded what happened in my study. Maggie's voice low and deliberate. "Arthur will hand everything to the FBI on Monday morning." Nathan's response came from across the room, tighter than I had ever heard it, stretched thin over something that sounded almost like panic. What are you going to do? Make sure he doesn't get to Monday. A long pause. Then Nathan, you said you were going to scare him. You said you were just going to scare him into backing off. I said what you needed to hear at the time. Her voice did not waver. This is what needs to happen now. He's Arthur. Nathan's voice cracked open on the name, cracked the way voices crack when they are saying the name of someone real. Someone who had sat at their dinner table and laughed at their jokes and been kind to them without calculation. He's been coming to this house since I was 7 years old. Then you understand exactly how much he knows, Maggie said, and exactly why this cannot wait. The sound of Nathan's footsteps crossed the room, and the door opened and closed. He drove to a parking lot on the post road and sat for 2 hours. I know this because he told me later in a visiting room that smelled of industrial cleaner and regret. He sat in his car in that parking lot and told himself he didn't believe she would actually do it. And the part of him that knew better, the part that had watched his mother operate for 38 years, stayed very quiet and let him believe whatever he needed to believe, to drive home. He did not call Arthur. He did not call the police. He chose the silence of a man who has gone too far into something to find the exit and has decided that not looking for it is easier than accepting that it is gone. Arthur Sinclair died sometime in the early hours of Friday morning. The responding officers found him in the kitchen of his cabin on Lake Warramog. A gas line connection beneath the stove had been loosened. The smoke detector on the ceiling had been disabled, the battery removed and replaced with a piece of electrical tape over the sensor that would not be visible from the floor. The back door, which Arthur habitually left unlocked, had been secured from the outside with a simple wedge. Near the point of ignition in the debris, officers recovered a silver cigarette lighter engraved with the initials EJC. It had been a gift. Arthur had given it to me 20 years ago after we won a case together that everyone said was unwinnable. I had kept it in the top drawer of my study desk for years. I had not touched it in months. Detective Frank Kowalski knocked on my front door at 8:15 on Saturday morning with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man carrying information he had not yet decided what to do with. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I'm very sorry to tell you this. Arthur Sinclair passed away last night." I gripped the doorframe with both hands. The wood was solid and cool beneath my fingers, and I held on to it. Because my legs had gone unsteady in a way they had not since the first morning I woke up in Greenwich Hospital and understood that I could not see. 31 years. The big rolling laugh, the mahogany cane, the way he said Ed when he was about to tell me something I did not want to hear but needed to. "Thank you, Detective," I said when I could speak again. "Arthur was my oldest friend." Kowalski nodded. He held my gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, the look of a man who had written a report he knew was incomplete, and was standing on the front porch of the person most affected by that decision. He put his hat back on and walked to his car. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway and pressed my back against the wood and let myself grieve fully and without restraint for exactly 4 minutes. Then I started thinking about what came next. The music box was still recording. Arthur had already sent copies to Patricia. And somewhere in the debris of a cabin on Lake Warramog, a lighter with my initials was sitting in an evidence bag with my name on it. Before I tell you what happened at 6 o'clock the next morning, if you are still with me, type "still here" in the comments right now. I want to know you haven't left, because what comes next is the part that broke me. A reminder, this story contains fictional elements shaped for meaning and depth. If this kind of storytelling isn't for you, this is a natural place to step away, and I respect that completely. They came at 6 in the morning the way they always do. I was already awake. I had not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since Arthur died, and that morning I had been sitting in the chair by my bedroom window since 4 o'clock, watching the darkness outside, thin from black to gray, to the particular pale blue that precedes a Connecticut autumn sunrise. I heard the cars before I saw them, two of them pulling onto the gravel drive with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of people who know the door will open. 4 hard knocks, not a request, a statement. I put on my robe, found my dark glasses on the nightstand, and walked to the top of the stairs. Below me, Maggie had already reached the front door. She was in her silk robe, her hair down. She had been awake too. I understood waiting in the way that people wait when they know what is coming, and have spent considerable time ensuring that it arrives correctly. She opened the door, and her hands flew to her mouth, and the sound she made was the sound of a woman who has just received the most devastating news of her life. 20 years of charity galas had given her a masterclass in public emotion. She deployed it now with the precision of a surgeon. The lead agent stepped inside. He was perhaps 42, with the careful face of a man who had learned to keep his personal responses entirely separate from his professional ones. He looked past Maggie to where I stood at the top of the stairs. Edward James Calloway. His voice carried up the stairwell with the flat precision of a man reciting something he had recited many times. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement of funds from a federally registered nonprofit organization, charges falling under federal jurisdiction as the transactions crossed state lines, and conspiracy in the death of Arthur James Sinclair. The conspiracy charge is supported by documented communications from your device to the victim in the weeks preceding his death, as well as physical evidence recovered at the scene. The documented communications. The messages Maggie had sent from my phone to Arthur, the threatening ones, the ones that told him to back down, to stay quiet, to let it go. She had built the motive into the record with my own name attached to it. I came down the stairs one at a time, my hand on the rail. Nathan stood at the entrance to the kitchen in a gray t-shirt and bare feet, his face the color of old chalk. When I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned toward him, his mouth opened and then closed without producing a sound. His eyes were filling fast, the eyes of a man trying desperately to hold something back and losing the fight, and he pressed the back of his hand hard against his lips and looked away from me. I had one thing left to do. May I say goodbye to my granddaughter? I asked. The lead agent looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded once. Rosa had already gone upstairs. I heard her knock on Lily's door, heard her voice gentle and urgent, and then Lily's footsteps, quick and confused, coming down the hall. She appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep, her eyes struggling to understand what she was seeing below her. When she saw the agents, when she saw the handcuffs in one of their hands, her face crumpled completely, and she came down the stairs so fast I was afraid she would fall. She hit me hard enough to make me take a step back. Her arms went around my waist and her face pressed into my chest, and her whole small body shook with sobs she was trying to contain and failing entirely. "Grandpa," she kept saying, muffled against my robe. "Grandpa, Grandpa." I held her with both arms and pressed my face into her hair, and I did not let myself fall apart because she needed me steady for exactly this moment, and I would be steady for her if it was the last thing I managed. "Listen to me," I said quietly, close to her ear. "I need you to do something important." She pulled back just enough to look up at me, her face wet and searching, her eyes full of a trust so absolute it made my chest ache with the weight of it. "Keep the music box safe," I said. "Whatever happens, keep it safe and keep your promise. Can you do that?" Her arms tightened around me. "I promise, Grandpa." "Good girl." I kissed the top of her head. I straightened up. Outside, neighbors stood on their lawns in robes and slippers, watching. Maggie had positioned herself in the doorway, both hands pressed to her mouth, shoulders trembling with precisely calibrated distress, angled perfectly for the cameras she knew would arrive within the hour. Dennis Kraft held a press conference at 11 that morning, describing a straightforward case of greed and betrayal. A man who had spent his career managing other people's money and finally decided to help himself. That evening, Maggie called Rosa into the kitchen. She asked after Rosa's daughter in Hartford by name. She asked about Rosa's nephew, the one who had recently moved up from San Antonio the previous spring, whose documentation situation had not yet fully resolved. She asked these questions with the warm interest of an employer who paid close attention to the lives of her staff. And every question was a door opened just wide enough to show what was standing behind it. Rosa came home that night and sat in her car in her own driveway for 20 minutes before her hands stopped shaking enough to take the keys from the ignition. She kept quiet. But she kept the music box in her mind the way you keep a thing that you know without knowing exactly why you know it that you are going to need. Claire Donovan was 34 years old and had the eyes of someone who had been paying close attention to everything for all 34 of those years. She walked into the visiting room at the Bridgeport Correctional Center on a Tuesday morning with a legal pad under her arm and a coffee she had not touched. Set both on the table and looked at me the way a person looks at a problem they have already decided to solve. She was Arthur's student for 3 years and his associate for 4 more. And the first thing she said to me was, not, "I believe you," or "we'll get through this," or any of the careful reassurances that lawyers dispense when they do not yet know what they are dealing with. She said, "Arthur called me 40 minutes before he died." My chest tightened until breathing required a conscious decision. "What did he say?" "He was driving. He sounded like a man who understood he was running out of time." She kept her voice level, but something moved through it, a tremor she controlled quickly, the way you control something that would undo you if you let it. "He gave me 2 names, Maggie Calloway, Howard Greer. He started to say a third, a doctor, he said, and the line went dead." She looked at me directly. "I called back 6 times. He never answered." "A doctor," I said. "Gordon Hale. He prescribed my eye drops." Claire wrote the name without blinking. "Tell me everything." I told her everything. 37 years of professional habit had given me the ability to present complex information in sequence without editorializing, and I used it now. The drops, the saline, the recovery, the dark glasses, the footage, the music box. When I finished, Claire's pen had stopped moving, and she was looking at me with an expression that moved through surprise into something more complex. The expression of a woman rapidly reconstructing everything she had understood about the situation in front of her. "The prison physician examined me once on intake," I said. "I performed the standard photophobia responses, flinching at light, slow pupil tracking. You also filed a medical accommodation request, allowing me to keep the dark glasses due to documented light sensitivity from the original trauma. No one looked closely enough to see what I was hiding." "Where is the music box now?" she asked. "My granddaughter had it when I was arrested. She promised to keep it safe." Claire was already reaching for her phone. She and Kowalski drove to my house that afternoon. Maggie answered the door in a cashmere sweater, her expression composed into the warm sorrow of a woman navigating a family tragedy with dignity. She said Lily was staying with her mother in Vermont. It had seemed best, she explained, given everything that had happened. Children needed stability. She was sure they understood. She led them upstairs. Lily's room had been emptied with the thoroughness of someone who understood that objects carry memories and memories carry danger. The bookshelf stood bare. The desk had been cleared. The long wooden shelf where her stuffed animals had lived, where the music box had sat every evening, showed 4 pale circles in the dust where the largest items had rested. The wardrobe stood open and empty. Kowalski asked Rosa a few questions while Maggie was out of earshot. Rosa answered each one carefully, her hands folded in front of her, her face giving nothing away. But when Kowalski turned to follow Maggie back downstairs, Rosa looked at Claire for just a moment, 1 second, no more, and something passed between them that was not words and did not need to be. Claire left her business card on the kitchen counter, half tucked beneath the fruit bowl, when she shook Maggie's hand goodbye. Rosa called her 8 days later. They met at a diner on the Post Road in Fairfield, a corner booth a Tuesday morning after the breakfast rush had cleared. Rosa wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and did not look up when she began speaking. The little girl cried for 2 hours when Mrs. Calloway had her things removed, Rosa said. Her voice was thin but steady, the voice of a woman who had made a decision and was going to see it through regardless of the cost. She kept saying her grandfather had told her to put something to sleep in the safest place. She said it over and over. Rosa finally looked up. I didn't see any music box in the donation bags. I went through every one of them before the truck came. Claire leaned forward. Rosa, is there anything else? Rosa opened her purse. She set a small brown bottle on the table between them. A prescription eye drop bottle sealed the original pharmacy label intact. She had taken it from the medicine cabinet in Ed's bathroom the morning the donations went out, sliding it into her apron pocket, while Maggie directed the movers. She had not known precisely why she took it. She had known only that it felt like the kind of thing that should not disappear. I want to give this to someone who knows what to do with it, Rosa said. Her hands were trembling now, a fine, persistent tremor she could not quite suppress. I want to give it to someone I can trust. Claire looked at the bottle for a long moment. Then she picked it up carefully, the way you pick up something that might be the most important thing in the room, and said, I'm going to need to file a court order to submit this as evidence. That means it goes through official channels, documented, authenticated, with a proper chain of custody, so it holds up in court. Are you willing to do that? Rosa's jaw tightened. She thought about her nephew. She thought about the question Maggie had asked about his documentation and the careful way she had asked it and what that question had meant. She had been afraid for a long time. Fear was something she understood. But she also understood that fear left alone long enough became its own kind of prison. Then she thought about Lily crying for 2 hours over a box that was no longer there. Yes, she said, I'm willing. Claire called me at 7 the next morning. She had not slept. I could tell by the particular quality of her voice, not tired exactly, but stripped down the way voices get when someone has been running on determination for long enough that the social layers have worn away, and what remains is pure signal. Ed, she said, I need you to tell me about a man named Howard Greer. I told her everything I knew. Greer had come recommended by Maggie 3 years ago when I had decided to restructure my estate planning. He was thorough, unhurried, credentialed from Yale Law, and I had liked him in the way you like a professional who does not waste your time. I had trusted his work because Maggie trusted it, and because I had not yet learned what Maggie's trust was worth. I'm going to Bright Harbor this morning, Claire said. Patricia Lund has been expecting my call. Patricia Lund had run Bright Harbor Foundation's day-to-day operations for 11 years, with the particular devotion of a woman who understood that every dollar she protected was a child's treatment option. She was 61 years old, with close-cropped silver hair and the direct manner of someone who had stopped softening difficult information sometime in her late 40s. When Claire arrived at the Foundation's offices on Greenwich Avenue, Patricia was already at her desk with a manila folder in front of her. Arthur told me to keep these somewhere Mrs. Calloway would never think to look, Patricia said, sliding the folder across the desk. So I filed them under Annual Donor Reports 2019. She paused. Arthur said if anything happened to him, I should give them to whoever came asking with his name. Claire opened the folder. Inside were the original trust documents, the full restructuring package that Howard Greer had prepared, and I had signed on a Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table while Maggie poured coffee and told me Greer was the best in his field. Claire read through them twice. On the third reading, she found what she was looking for buried in Section 14, subsection C, in the careful language of a man who had been paid to make something permanent look routine. In the event that the grantor is convicted of any offense classified as financial fraud, embezzlement, or related financial felony under state or federal law, all rights, powers, and interests of the grantor in the trust shall terminate automatically and irrevocably upon sentencing with no right of appeal or petition for reinstatement. She called me from the parking lot. Ed. Her voice had the quality it got when she was processing rage through the filter of professional necessity. She didn't want you dead. She wanted you convicted. I sat with the phone pressed against my ear and the concrete wall of the visiting room in front of me, and let the full architecture of it settle into place. The drops, the cognitive dulling, the carefully constructed evidence trail, the trust clause buried in documents I had signed on a Sunday afternoon because I had trusted the woman sitting across from me. She had not needed me to disappear. She had needed me to be convicted of a financial felony, alive and in prison, permanently stripped of every legal right I possessed, while she managed everything I had spent 40 years building. How long had the clause been in there? I asked. 2 years, Claire said. Greer drafted it 2 years ago, before your retirement, before the accident, before any of this. 2 years. Before I had understood there was anything to understand. There's something else, Claire said. Under Connecticut trust law, specifically, the Uniform Trust Code, a document created through fraud or undue influence, can be voided by the court entirely. It's called void ab initio. If we can prove the trust amendment was drafted as part of a criminal conspiracy, the clause doesn't just fail. The entire amendment disappears as if it never existed. She paused. We argue the criminal case and the civil case simultaneously. We don't just clear your name, we take back everything she tried to take. Something shifted in my chest. Not hope exactly, because hope was a dangerous thing in a place like this, but something adjacent to it. The cold, specific feeling of a problem that had seemed insurmountable beginning to reveal its edges. Howard Greer, I said. He'll be charged. Conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction, possibly more depending on what else we find. Claire's voice was precise and unhurried. Under the crime-fraud exception to attorney-client privilege, Greer cannot hide behind confidentiality when an attorney participates in a crime. The privilege that would normally protect their communications is void. Everything he said to Maggie, everything he drafted, everything he advised, it's all accessible. How many days until trial? 11, she said. I pressed my back teeth together and thought about Arthur Sinclair, who had sent copies to Patricia 8 weeks ago, because he understood that the most important thing about evidence is having it in more than one place. Then let's not waste any of them, I said. Dr. Sandra Osei had the unhurried competence of someone who had delivered difficult news enough times to have made peace with the moment before she said it. She was 46 years old, an attending ophthalmologist at Yale New Haven Hospital, with a specialty in neuro-ophthalmology, and a reputation, Claire told me later, for being the kind of doctor other doctors called when they needed someone who would not flinch at what they found. She looked at the bottle Rosa had kept, now properly submitted through a court order Claire had filed the previous week, its chain of custody documented and authenticated for admissibility, and turned it in her hands for a long moment before she spoke. I know what this is, she said. I need you to tell me how long he was using it. Claire told her. 8 weeks approximately. 4 administrations daily with evidence suggesting additional doses administered at night, without the patient's knowledge. Dr. Ose set the bottle down on her desk, with a care that was itself a kind of statement. Atropine sulfate, she said, at this concentration, is not a therapeutic eye drop. It is not used in legitimate optic nerve recovery protocols for trauma of this kind. She turned to her computer, pulled up the compound analysis the court-ordered lab had returned, and walked Claire through it with the methodical precision of a woman who understood that what she was about to say would eventually be said in front of 12 people who had not gone to medical school. The formulation contains atropine sulfate at 4 times the standard therapeutic concentration, combined with a cholinesterase inhibitor, a compound that suppresses the enzyme responsible for breaking down acetylcholine in the central nervous system. What does that mean in plain language? Claire asked. It means that the drops were doing 2 things simultaneously. Dr. Ose's voice was level and entirely hollow, at the same time the voice of a woman identifying something she had suspected from the first sentence and had hoped she was wrong about. The atropine caused sustained progressive mydriasis, permanent dilation of the pupils that prevented the eyes from adjusting to light variations and actively suppressed the natural healing process. Without those drops, a patient with Mr. Calloway's type of optic nerve trauma would expect meaningful recovery within 6 to 8 weeks. She paused. With them, the damage would have continued indefinitely, maintained and worsened by each administration. And the cholinesterase inhibitor, Claire pressed. And that is the part that concerns me most. Dr. Ose turned from the screen to face Claire directly. Systemic absorption of a cholinesterase inhibitor through repeated ocular application at this concentration affects the central nervous system. The cognitive effects include confusion, impaired short-term memory, difficulty concentrating, and significantly increased suggestibility. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. In a 65-year-old patient recovering from head trauma, those effects would be profound. He would sign documents he had no memory of signing. He would agree to things he could not later recall agreeing to. He would become, for all practical purposes, a person who could not protect himself from the people around him. The words came out quieter with each sentence, as though she was hearing what she was saying and understanding it more fully as it left her mouth. Whoever prescribed this was not treating his eyes. They were dismantling his mind. Claire pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment. Then she opened her notebook and looked at the name she had written there 8 weeks ago. The name Arthur Sinclair had been saying when the line went dead on the Merritt Parkway. There's a Dr. Gordon Hale. The prescribing physician, Claire said. Does the name Gordon Hale mean anything to you? Dr. Ose looked at her steadily. It will mean something to the Connecticut Medical Board. Claire tried Dennis Kraft's office on the drive back. His assistant said he was in trial preparation and unavailable. Claire left her name and number and did not expect a callback. She had stopped expecting reasonable behavior from the prosecution 2 weeks ago. She came to the visiting room that afternoon and told me everything. I sat with the information and looked at the wall and thought about the mornings I had woken in the dark, convinced that my memory was failing, that my mind was going the way old men's minds sometimes go, quietly and without ceremony. I had told myself it was the accident. I had told myself it was age. Maggie had let me believe both of those things. She had sat beside my bed and administered the drops with gentle, practiced hands, and listened to me apologize for forgetting things. And she had said, "Don't worry, it happens," and she had meant something entirely different by it than I understood at the time. She was keeping you manageable, Claire said. The words landed in my chest and stayed there. Yes, I said after a moment. She was. Claire stood at the door of the visiting room. Her face was composed, but her hands at her sides had curled into fists. She was pressing against her thighs with controlled, deliberate force. 8 days, Ed. I nodded at the wall. Then let's finish this, I said. Nathan came at 9:53. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock on the visiting room wall since 9 o'clock, counting the minutes the way I used to count discrepancies in audit reports, methodically, without attachment to what the number might mean. The guard opened the door, and my son walked in, and I understood immediately that he had not slept in several days. He was wearing a flannel shirt, with the collar crooked, the kind of shirt a man pulls on in the dark when he has stopped making decisions about small things because the large ones have used up everything he has. His hair was uncombed. His face was the face of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally decided that the carrying was going to kill him faster than putting it down. He sat across from me and looked at his hands on the table. Then he looked up, and everything on his face came apart at once, not slowly, not in stages, but all at once, the way a window breaks the whole surface, giving way simultaneously. His eyes filled so fast he couldn't blink it back, and a sound came out of him that he had clearly been holding down for months, low and ragged and private. The sound of a man who has finally stopped performing being fine. "Dad," he said. His voice came out wrecked. "I don't know where to start." "Well, then don't start," I said. "Just talk." He talked. He told me about the gambling, not the sanitized version, not the 2.3 million figure I already knew, but the actual story. The first bet that was supposed to be fun. The second that was supposed to win back the first. The specific morning 18 months ago when he had understood with complete clarity that he was in a hole he could not climb out of alone, and had felt, rather than fear, a strange and terrible relief, because at least now the decision about what to do next would be made for him by circumstances rather than by his own will. He told me about Maggie coming to him, not asking. Coming the way a person arrives when they already know the answer and only need the other person to say yes. She had known about the gambling for months before she approached him. She had let the debt accumulate. She had waited until the number was large enough that yes was the only syllable he had left. Then she had paid a portion of what he owed to the loan sharks, enough to keep them from his door, not enough to set him free. And he had understood, without her saying it directly, that the remainder would be handled once the plan was complete. "She told me it would be simple," Nathan said. His voice was steadier now, the steadiness of a man who has decided to get through something rather than stop in the middle of it. "She said you'd be in a care facility within a year anyway, that we were just accelerating something that was going to happen regardless." He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye socket hard. "I got very good at believing that. I practiced it every single day." "When did you stop?" I asked. He dropped his hand. His eyes were red and streaming, and he was not doing anything about it, not wiping them, not looking away, just letting it happen the way weather happens. "The morning the FBI came," he said. "When you asked if you could say goodbye to Lily." His voice broke on her name, and he pressed through it without stopping. "You didn't argue. You didn't ask for a lawyer. You just asked if you could say goodbye to your granddaughter, and she ran down those stairs, and you held her and told her to keep the music box safe." He pressed his lips together until they went white. I was standing right there. I watched it happen, and I knew what we had done, and there was nothing in the world I could do to make that not be true. "Arthur," I said. Nathan flinched as though I had struck him. "I didn't know she was going to. I swear to God, Dad, I didn't know what she was actually planning to do. She told me she was going to scare him, warn him off." His hands slammed flat against the table, trembling. When he died, I understood what she was, what she actually was. And by then, I was already in it so deep I couldn't see a way out that didn't take me down with it. So you stayed quiet. I stayed quiet. He did not try to soften it. That was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever given me. I had moved out of the house the week after your arrest, he told me. Got a room in a motel on the Post Road in Norwalk. He had gone to the Norwalk Public Library 3 times over the following weeks and used their computers to contact the Connecticut District Attorney's Office through an email account Maggie didn't know existed. He had signed the proffer agreement digitally. The agreement guaranteed that his testimony in the session itself couldn't be used directly against him, though it didn't protect him from prosecution on the underlying charges. He understood that. He was going to be held accountable for what he had done. He had accepted that. What he had not yet accepted was standing up in that courtroom. Dad. His voice dropped to something very quiet. I don't know if I can do it tomorrow. When it comes to it. I don't know if I have it in me. I looked at my son across that scratched table under the fluorescent light. Yes, you do, I said. That's why you're here tonight. He stood up slowly. At the door, he stopped his back to me, his hand on the frame. His voice came out low and careful, each word placed down like something breakable. Lily asked me why I didn't protect you. A long pause. I didn't have an answer for her. The door closed behind him. I sat in the empty room and thought about Claire calling me that afternoon. Lou Barnett had signed her affidavit about the dark sedan. Kowalski had retrieved his preliminary notebook from the locked drawer of his home desk, where he had kept it for 3 months. The blue ink on yellowed paper still perfectly legible. The break line. 3 sentences that had been sitting in a locked drawer while Arthur Sinclair was buried, and I was processed, and Maggie had arranged flowers for the front hallway of my house. Tomorrow all of it came out. Before I show you what that music box recorded, type "justice" in the comments. If you believe the truth always finds its way, I need to know you're with me before you see this. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. A gentle note, what follows includes fictional elements crafted to carry a lesson that I believe matters. If this isn't the kind of story you're here for, this is your moment to step away, and I understand completely. Claire told me about that night so many times with such precision that it feels like my own memory now. She and Tommy Reyes worked through the night in her office on the 4th floor of a building on Chambers Street. The kind of office that exists on determination and bad coffee rather than square footage, with a whiteboard covered in names and dates and arrows that connected things only the 2 of them fully understood. Tommy was 29 years old and had processed forensic footage for 3 different defense firms over 6 years. He had seen things in that work that most people are fortunate enough never to encounter. He was not easily rattled. Claire told me later that this was the first time she had seen him need a moment. The music box had come to her through Rosa, who had gotten it from Lily directly. When Claire found Lily in Vermont, her mother had brought her back after Lily kept telling anyone who would listen that Grandma Maggie had done something bad. To Grandpa, Lily had opened her school backpack and taken the music box out with both hands, holding it the way you hold something that has been entrusted to you and that you intend to return in exactly the condition you received it. Grandpa said, "Keep it safe," Lily told her. I kept it safe. She had never put it in the Narnia closet. She had carried it with her the entire time. The Narnia closet, she explained to Claire, was the big wardrobe at home, and home was where Grandma Maggie was. Her backpack was safer. She had decided that herself. Tommy extracted the chip using a forensic protocol designed to preserve evidentiary integrity under Doe-Bear standards, the legal framework that governs the admissibility of scientific and technical evidence in federal court. Every step was documented. Every tool used was logged. The chain of custody that had begun when Ed installed the camera in his own home legal under Connecticut law, as the device was installed by the property owner in a private residence, ran unbroken from that September evening to this desk on Chambers Street. The footage loaded at 11:47 at night. Night vision. Green-gray and luminous, with the particular clarity of infrared that makes darkness look like a different kind of daylight. The timestamp in the lower right corner read the date, and then the time precise to the second. Tommy played the first segment, the study, Ed's desk. Nathan standing in front of it, with the phone in both hands, pressing Ed's right thumb against the biometric reader. His hands were shaking so badly that the system rejected the first attempt. He pressed again. The authentication chimed at 11:47 and 52 seconds. On the screen behind him, a transfer interface appeared, and a number $1.2 million confirmed and cleared. Nathan's head dropped forward. His shoulders curved inward like a man receiving a blow he had been expecting and still was not prepared for. Tommy played the second segment. Howard Greer at the desk 3 nights later. The trust documents spread across the surface. Greer's voice captured clearly by the motion-activated microphone, walking Nathan through each page with the professional efficiency of a man who billed by the hour and intended to be thorough. Ed's hand lifted, positioned, pressed, creating a record of consent that had never been given. Then Tommy scrolled to the third segment. He found it flagged by the motion sensor at 2:13 in the morning, from a date 6 weeks into the recording window. He played it without speaking. Claire watched it without speaking. The study was dark. The only light the faint, ambient glow of the street lamp through the curtains, rendered in the silver green of infrared. The door opened. Maggie stepped into the frame. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair down, moving through the darkness with the ease of someone who had made this particular journey many times before. She did not turn on any lights. She crossed to the desk, opened her left hand, and removed a small brown bottle from the pocket of her robe. She unscrewed the cap. She held the bottle over Ed's closed right eye and administered 3 drops with the measured, practiced precision of a woman following a procedure she had rehearsed. Then the left eye. 3 more drops. Then she straightened up, and she stood there. For 11 seconds, Tommy counted them later, frame by frame. Maggie Calloway stood beside the chair where her husband slept and looked at him. Her face was turned toward the camera without knowing it. The infrared caught every detail. Her expression was not triumphant. It was not cruel. It was something that was in its own way more disturbing than either of those things. It was entirely, completely calm. The expression of a person performing a routine task and finding nothing remarkable about it. Then she turned and walked out of the frame, and the door closed behind her, and the study was empty again, except for the sleeping man in the chair and the small wooden box on the shelf that had watched every second of it. Tommy stopped the playback. He did not say anything for 1 full minute. Claire told me she counted. He sat with his elbows on the desk and his hands pressed flat against his face, and the silence in the room had a quality to it that neither of them tried to fill. Then he picked up his phone and began preparing the authentication documentation. Claire called Kowalski at 3:17 in the morning. He picked up on the first ring. That single fact, that Detective Frank Kowalski, 54 years old and 26 years on the job, answered his phone on the first ring at 3:17 in the morning, told me everything I needed to know about how he had been sleeping since Arthur Sinclair died. "I have the footage," Claire said. "All of it. You need to see it before court." Kowalski's voice when it came was the voice of a man who had been waiting for a specific phone call for 3 months and had not allowed himself to believe it was actually going to come. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. I lay on my bunk in the Bridgeport Correctional Center and stared at the ceiling and felt something I had been carefully refusing to feel for 3 months. Not hope. Something steadier than hope. The arithmetic for the first time was adding up. Dennis Kraft was good. I will give him that without reservation. He had the jury's complete attention within 40 seconds of standing up, which is harder than it sounds when you are asking 12 people who did not go to law school to care deeply about wire transfer protocols and Delaware shell corporations. He used plain language. He used the word greed twice, betrayal once, and premeditated 3 times. He told the story of Edward Calloway as a man who had spent 37 years managing other people's money and had finally decided to help himself, and when the one person who might expose him refused to be silenced, had made sure that person could not talk. He told it cleanly and with conviction, and every word of it was a lie dressed in the clothes of evidence, and he believed it completely. I sat beside Claire and arranged my hands flat on the table and breathed evenly and listened. When Kraft finished, Claire stood up. She was quieter than he was, deliberate. She did not use the word innocent once. Instead, she used the phrase, not what it appears to be 4 times applied to 4 different pieces of the prosecution's evidence. And each time she said it, she looked directly at a different juror, and each time I watched that juror's face do something small and uncertain. She was planting seeds. Reasonable doubt grows from seeds, and Claire Donovan had spent 4 months preparing this soil. Dr. Sandra Osei took the stand first. She settled into the witness chair with the composure of a woman who had decided exactly what she was going to say and was not afraid to say it. Claire walked her through the compound analysis, the atropine sulfate, the cholinesterase inhibitor, the dual mechanism of sustained mydriasis and cognitive suppression. 2 jurors in the front row leaned forward before she was halfway through. Kraft cross-examined with controlled aggression. He attacked the methodology of the lab analysis, suggested the bottle's chain of custody was insufficient, implied that Dr. Osei was exceeding her expertise by drawing conclusions about cognitive effects. Dr. Osei looked at him with eyes that had watched 47 seconds of footage the night before and had spent the drive to the courthouse this morning, understanding exactly what she was here to do. The chain of custody for that bottle, she said evenly, was established through a court order filed by defense counsel and processed through the state crime laboratory. The documentation is in evidence as Exhibit 14. She paused 1 beat. And my expertise in neuro-ophthalmology encompasses precisely the neurological effects I described. I would be pleased to walk the jury through my publication record if Mr. Kraft believes that would be helpful. Kraft sat down. Detective Frank Kowalski took the stand next. He had worn his good suit, dark navy, slightly too formal for the body inside it, but he carried himself with the weight of 26 years, and he was not nervous. He stated his name, his length of service, and then he said in a voice that did not waver by a single degree that his official report on the accident on Route 15 had been incomplete. The gallery stirred. Detective Kowalski, Claire said, "Can you explain what you mean by incomplete?" "I observed evidence at the scene consistent with deliberate tampering of the brake system," he said. "Specifically, a clean incision on the primary brake line that was inconsistent with mechanical wear or accidental damage. I documented this observation in my preliminary notes." He paused. "My official report did not include that observation because I was instructed by my supervisor to characterize the incident as mechanical failure and write the report accordingly." Why are you disclosing this now?" Kowalski looked at the jury. "Because I wrote the wrong report, and because Connecticut's Whistleblower Protection Act, General Statutes, Section 31-51M, protects officers who voluntarily disclose information about conduct that was improper provided the disclosure is made in good faith to an appropriate authority. His jaw tightened. This is me making that disclosure. In the most appropriate authority I know. Kraft's cross-examination was sharp and personal. He went after Kowalski's proximity to retirement, his motivations, the 3-month gap between the incident and his disclosure. Kowalski absorbed every question with the stillness of a man who had judged himself more harshly than Kraft was capable of managing and had decided to stand up anyway. Patricia Lund testified about the foundation records. 3 shell companies, same registered agent in Wilmington. $4.8 million routed through Panama. Her voice was steady and her documentation was meticulous, and when Kraft tried to suggest she might have personal motivations for her testimony, she looked at him with the expression of a woman who had spent 11 years making sure sick children got their treatments paid for and found the implication beneath her notice. Then Claire stood and addressed the court. Saitio, Your Honor, the defense has one remaining piece of evidence, a digital recording extracted from a device installed by the defendant in his own private residence, which is lawful under Connecticut law, as the property owner has the right to record within his own home. Connecticut's 2-party consent statute contains an established exception when recording is conducted by a property owner to document an ongoing felony on his own premises, a point the defense has fully briefed in Exhibit 30. The footage has been authenticated by forensic specialist Thomas Reyes, according to Dober standards, and maintained under proper chain of custody. She paused. Before I present it, I'd like to request the court's permission to have a minor bring the device into the courtroom. She will not be examined or sworn in. She is the reason this evidence exists, and I believe her presence is relevant to the jury's understanding of how it came to be preserved. Judge Whitman looked at Claire for a long moment. How old is the minor? 10 years old, Your Honor. The judge looked at Kraft. Kraft opened his mouth, thought better of it, and closed it again. Permission granted, Judge Whitman said. The minor will not be approached by either party. Bailiff, please bring her in. The phone records came in as Exhibit 22, Maggie's cellular records, showing 11 calls to a prepaid burner number in the 72 hours preceding Arthur Sinclair's death. The burner had been traced by the FBI to a man currently in federal custody on unrelated charges who had provided a cooperation agreement and would testify in the penalty phase that he had been hired to disable a smoke detector and secure a door at a cabin on Lake Waramog on a specific evening in October. Maggie's attorney objected to the phone records. Judge Whitman overruled him without looking up from the bench. Tommy projected the footage. The first segment, the second, then the third, 47 seconds. 2:13 in the morning. Maggie stepping into the frame in infrared light, moving with the ease of someone who had done this many times before, administering the drops with practiced efficiency, standing over the sleeping man in the chair for 11 seconds, with a face that showed nothing at all. The juror in seat 3 pressed her hand over her mouth. The juror in seat 7 looked down at the table in front of her and did not look up again. Maggie's attorney leaned over and said something urgent into her ear, and from the plaintiff's table, in a voice stripped of every layer of cultivation she had spent decades applying, Maggie Calloway said, "This footage has been fabricated." The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Lily walked in. She was wearing the blue dress with the white collar, the one she saved for school concerts, and the kind of occasions she understood even at 10 years old required a person to show up as their best self. Her hair was brushed. Her shoes were the good ones. Someone had helped her prepare, but the preparation only went so far because she was 10 years old, and she was walking into a room full of strangers and cameras and the particular gravity of adult consequence, and her arms were wrapped around the music box the way she had wrapped them around it every evening for months, because that was what she had been asked to do, and she had not stopped doing it. She found me immediately. Across the length of that courtroom, past the gallery and the bar and the defense table, her eyes found me the way a compass needle finds north, without hesitation, without searching, with the absolute certainty of someone who has never had a reason to doubt the direction. When they did, her chin began to tremble. Her lower lip pressed against her upper one hard, the way I had taught her to do when she needed to be brave about something that felt too large to be brave about. I nodded at her once. She nodded back, squared her small shoulders, kept walking. Behind me, I heard Rosa make a sound in the gallery, a single sharp intake of breath that she pressed down into something smaller, and could not entirely suppress the sound of a woman watching something arrive that she had prayed for without quite believing it would. Claire met Lily at the bar. She knelt down and said something quietly, and Lily nodded with the gravity of a general receiving final orders before a battle. Then Lily stepped forward and placed the music box on the evidence table with both hands, carefully, the way you set down something that has been trusted to you and that you are now entrusting to someone else. She stepped back and stood with her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes on the box. Claire turned to face the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address one question before we proceed. Why was this music box in that study on those particular nights? She let the question sit for a moment. Lily Calloway goes to her grandfather's study when she is frightened. She has done this for years. It is the room that feels safest to her. She was there on those nights because she missed him. She put the music box on that shelf every single evening because an old man on a visiting room phone asked her to, and she loved him enough to do it without asking why. Claire's voice dropped slightly. That is the one variable that no amount of planning could account for. Not a camera, not a lawyer, not a court order. A 10-year-old girl who kept her promise. The room was very still. Judge Whitman looked at me. Mr. Calloway, she said, you may address the court. I stood up. I reached up and I took off my dark glasses. The courtroom came into focus around me, sharp and fully present, all of it for the first time in months. The wood paneling, the American flag in the corner, the 12 faces in the jury box looking at me with expressions that ranged from shock to something that might have been awe. Judge Whitman at the bench watching me with the careful attention of a woman recalibrating rapidly. Kraft at his table, his pen perfectly still. And Maggie at the plaintiff's table 20 feet away, looking at me with eyes that had finally, for the first time in 6 months, lost their certainty. The composed mask she had worn through every day of this trial, through 20 years of charity galas and foundation boards, and a marriage she had spent 2 years planning to dismantle, was gone. What was underneath it was not fury. It was not calculation. It was fear. Simple and unadorned, and entirely too late. I installed that camera to protect my granddaughter, I said. My voice came out steady and clear and carried through the silent room without effort. I never imagined it would protect me. I looked at Maggie directly, and I held her gaze, and I said what I had been waiting 6 months to say. I can see you. I have been able to see you for a very long time. From the gallery, Nathan stood up. His attorney grabbed his arm. Nathan pulled free, not violently, but with the quiet finality of a man who has made a decision that cannot be undone and does not want it to be. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Lily, who was standing at the evidence table with her hands still clasped, and her eyes wide and her face doing something enormous and complicated that she was working very hard to contain. Then he looked at me. Your Honor. His voice came out rough and cracked and carrying. I have a cooperation agreement with the Connecticut District Attorney's Office. I signed it 48 hours ago. I am prepared to testify. The gallery erupted. Judge Whitman's gavel came down twice. "Order!" Nathan walked to the witness stand. He took the oath. He sat down. He looked at Claire and nodded once. He talked for 22 minutes. He told the jury about the gambling debt, the exact figure $2,340,000. He told them about Maggie coming to him when the number was large enough that yes was the only syllable he had left. He told them about the transfers, the trust documents, the drops, Howard Greer, Dr. Hale. He told them about the evening Maggie told him what was going to happen to Arthur Sinclair and how he had driven to a parking lot on the post road and sat there for 2 hours and come home without making a single phone call. "I knew," he said, his voice breaking open on those 2 words. "I knew, and I said nothing. There is no excuse for that. I am not offering one." Kraft did not cross-examine. He sat at his table and looked at the documents in front of him and did not stand up. The jury watched him not stand up. The room understood what that meant. Maggie had been very still while Nathan spoke. Then she stood. "You coward." Her voice came out wrong, too high, stripped of every layer of cultivation she had spent decades applying. She was on her feet, and her attorney had both hands on her arm, and she shook him off. "You useless, ungrateful coward. I built everything for you. I protected you from yourself for 38 years. I did things you don't have the spine to do, and I did them for you, and this is what you—" "Mrs. Calloway." Judge Whitman's voice cut across the room like a blade. Maggie was not listening. She was looking at Nathan with eyes that were streaming now, not grief, but the fury of a person who has spent a lifetime controlling outcomes and is discovering that the one variable she could not control was the person she had controlled most completely. "Without me, you would have nothing," she said. "You would be nothing. And you stand up there and you throw it all away for him." Her attorney got hold of her arm with both hands and pulled firmly, and this time she did not shake him off. She looked at the room, at the 12 jurors watching her, at the reporters with their pens moving, at Nathan, standing by the witness stand, with his face gone very still. She sat down. 2 court officers approached the plaintiff's table. The handcuffs made a very small sound, precise and metallic and entirely permanent, the sound of a thing that cannot be undone. Lily was still standing at the evidence table. Her arms were at her sides now. Her hands opened the music box on the table in front of her. She watched the officers lead Maggie toward the side door, and her face held an expression I recognized. Not satisfaction, not relief, but the particular exhaustion of a child who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally been told she can put it down. She turned and looked at me. I opened my arms. She crossed the courtroom at a run. The jury was out for 41 minutes. I sat in the hallway outside courtroom 4 with Lily's head resting against my arm and her hand wrapped around mine, and I counted my own heartbeats the way I used to count discrepancies in audit reports, methodically, one at a time, because it was the only thing that kept the waiting from becoming something I could not manage. Rosa sat on my other side. She did not say anything. She did not try to fill the silence with reassurances she could not guarantee. She had worked in my house for 11 years, and she understood better than most people I have known that some moments do not need words, they need someone to stay. So she stayed. Her shoulder pressed against mine with a quiet steadiness that I felt more than I can describe, and I was more grateful for it than I knew how to say. Kowalski stood at the window at the far end of the hall. He had his back to us, his broad shoulders carrying the particular stillness of a man who has done something difficult and is standing very still while he waits to find out what it costs him. He had walked into that courtroom this morning and told the truth under oath about a report he had written wrong, and whatever came next for him professionally, He was going to have to carry it without the protection of the story he had been telling himself for 3 months. I watched his reflection in the dark glass of the window and thought that he looked, if anything, lighter than I had ever seen him. Lily tilted her head back and looked up at me. "Grandpa," she said, "are you scared?" I thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "No," I said. "Not anymore." She considered this. Then she tightened her hand around mine and pressed her cheek back against my arm, and we sat together in the hallway and waited. The bailiff appeared in the doorway at 2:58. I looked down at Lily. "Stay here," I said. "I'll come back out that door. I promise." She pressed her lips together and nodded. Once the same nod she had given me in the courtroom, the same small, squared shoulders, the same deliberate gathering of courage that I had watched her perform all morning, and that still undid me completely every time I saw it. She pulled the music box into her lap and held it with both arms. I went back in. The 12 jurors filed into the box without looking at me. I had spent enough time in courtrooms over the years to know that this meant nothing definitive in either direction. I arranged my hands flat on the defense table, and Claire pressed her knee briefly against mine beneath the table, and I breathed evenly and waited. The foreperson stood. She was a retired school principal from Bridgeport, 61 years old, with a face that had spent 3 weeks giving nothing away and gave nothing away now. She looked at the judge, then at the clerk, then at the paper in her hand. On the charge of wire fraud, she said, "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty." Claire's hand found my arm. On the charge of embezzlement of funds from a non-profit organization not guilty. The gallery began to stir, but Judge Whitman's gavel came down once, and it stopped. On the charge of conspiracy and the death of Arthur James Sinclair, not guilty. I closed my eyes. I gave myself exactly 3 seconds. I thought about Arthur Sinclair, about the mahogany cane and the rolling laugh, and 31 years of showing up. I thought about the phone call on the Merritt Parkway that he had not been allowed to finish. I thought about what it would have meant to him, sitting in that gallery, to hear those 2 words read aloud in this room. I thought about the morning I had sat on the floor of my study with shaking hands and 2 hours, and nothing but the absolute necessity of getting something right. And I thought about a 10-year-old girl who had carried a wooden box in her school backpack for 3 months without once being asked to explain why. I opened my eyes. Claire was crying. She had turned away slightly, pressing the back of her hand against her mouth, her shoulders shaking with the particular violence of someone who has been holding something together through pure force of will for 4 months and has just been told they can stop. I put my hand on her shoulder, and she gripped it hard and did not let go for a long moment. Then Lily came through the door. She had not waited. She had heard the words through the door, not all of them, not every legal phrase, but enough the way children hear the things that matter, and she was already running down the center aisle when I turned. She hit me with the full force of 10 years, and both arms, and I caught her and held on and pressed my face into her hair and let her cry the way children cry when something frightening has finally ended and the person they love most is still on the other side of it. She sobbed with her whole body, big, open, shaking sobs of relief that had nowhere left to be contained. "Grandpa," she kept saying. "Grandpa, Grandpa." Rosa was crying openly at the bench, not trying to hide it anymore, both hands pressed over her heart. Kowalski had turned from the window and was standing in the hallway doorway looking at the ceiling with red-rimmed eyes and the expression of a man who was absolutely not going to cry in a public corridor and was losing that particular battle completely. Judge Whitman came out of her chambers before she left for the day. She walked to where I stood and looked at me with the formal posture of a woman who had chosen her words carefully. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "what happened to you in this courtroom should not have happened. This court acknowledges that, and I acknowledge it." I stood straight. "Your Honor," I said, "the system didn't fail me. The people inside it did, and today the people inside it made it right." She held my gaze for a moment. Something moved through her expression, something that was not quite agreement and not quite absolution, but occupied the space between them honestly. Then she nodded once and walked away. I looked down at Lily, who was still pressed against my side with her arms around my waist and her face turned up toward mine. She held out the music box. I took it in both hands and lifted it until the brass keyhole was level with my eyes. The carved bird on the lid, the chipped paint at the corners, the small asymmetry where the keyhole fitting sat at a fractionally different angle than it had before. I had installed the camera, a permanent mark of what it had carried. "I built you to protect her," I said quietly. "You protected us both." Lily slipped her hand into mine. We walked out of the courthouse together into the February afternoon, into air that was cold and clean and tasted like the specific kind of relief that only arrives after you have stopped believing it will. The winter light was pale and direct, and it fell on everything without preference, on the courthouse steps and the bare trees and Lily's upturned face, and I stood in it for a moment and did not move. I had been in the dark for a long time. It was enough now just to see. 6 months is not a long time, it is long enough. I sold the Greenwich house in April. I did not feel sentimental about it. There was not a room in that house where Maggie had not stood, not a hallway where her footsteps had not measured out the distance between what she showed the world and what she actually was. I let it go without looking back, and I bought a smaller place, a white clapboard house 10 minutes from Rosa with a porch that faced west and caught the afternoon light in a way that made even ordinary evenings feel considered. The Arthur Sinclair Fund launched in May, housed within Bright Harbor Foundation, under Patricia Lund's careful management. It covered long-term treatment costs for families who had exhausted every other option. I read every quarterly report. I was not ready to stop paying attention to numbers, and I did not think I ever would be. Maggie was convicted on all counts in June. The trust amendment was voided by the court void ab initio, exactly as Claire had argued, as though it had never existed. Howard Greer surrendered his law license and was awaiting sentencing. Dr. Gordon Hale's medical license had been revoked by the Connecticut Medical Board in March. Nathan began his sentence in the spring. Lily visited him every other week with her mother. Each time she came back, she told me what he had said, and I listened without comment, because that was what she needed from me. Not judgment, not absolution, just someone to listen while she worked out what her father was becoming, slowly in the space between who he had been and who he was trying to be. On an evening in August, Lily sat beside me on the porch. She had the music box in her lap. She turned the small brass key on its underside the way she had turned it 10,000 times since she was 6 years old, and the dancer inside began to move. The notes rose into the warm August air, thin and clear and slightly imperfect, the way handmade things always are. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Lily listened to the first full rotation. Then she looked up at me. "Grandpa," she said, "what saved you?" I had been waiting for that question. "Not the camera," I said. "Not the footage, not the courtroom." She tilted her head. "Then what?" I put my hand over hers on the music box, over the chipped paint at the corners, over the carved bird on the lid, over the brass keyhole that had watched over both of us through the longest months of my life. A 10-year-old girl. I said, who kept her promise. Lily looked at the box for a moment. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder, and the music continued, and the light moved across the porch. The way August light moves slowly with the particular generosity of a season that knows it is ending and has decided to be beautiful about it. I had spent 37 years believing that numbers do not lie. I still believe that. But the thing that had saved me was not a number, and it was not a document, and it was not any system that I or anyone else had built. It was this: a child's hand in mine, a song we both knew, the evening coming down around us like something that had been waiting patiently for exactly this. You make me happy when skies are gray. I have spent 37 years believing that numbers do not lie. But this grandpastries has taught me something numbers never could. I almost lost everything, not to a stranger, but to the people sitting at my own table. Don't be like me. Read every document you sign. Question the kindness that arrives exactly when it is most convenient. And never let love make you careless. I am not a deeply religious man. But sitting on that porch with Lily's hand in mine, I understood what people mean when they say God works through the ones we love. It was a child's love, simple, unplanned, and completely faithful, that saved me when nothing else could. This was my revenge story. Not the revenge of anger, but the revenge of truth. Truth that a 10-year-old girl carried in a backpack for 3 months because an old man asked her to. If this grandpastry stayed with you, if any part of it felt true, drop a comment below and tell me what moved you most. Share it with someone who needs to hear that loyalty still exists. And if you believe truth always finds its way, subscribe so you never miss the next story. Every revenge story I tell carries a piece of something real. Thank you for staying until the very end. A gentle note: some details in these stories are fictional, crafted with the sole purpose of carrying a lesson worth your time. If that is not the kind of content you are here for, no hard feelings at all. Step away and find what speaks to you. But if you are still here, I am glad you stayed.